So hi, my name is Kelley Fox, and I'm a faith organizer with Ohio RCRC, and I'm here today with Jessie Hill, who is a professor at Case Western Reserve University Law School. And so today we're talking about the Supreme Court decision on June Medical versus Russo. So thank you for speaking with me today, Jessie.
Sure, thank you for having me.
So it sounds like today's ruling was a really big win for abortion supporters. Can you tell me a little bit more about the ruling? And were you surprised by the outcome?
Sure, yeah. So in the Supreme Court decision today, the court decided that a Louisiana law that required abortion providers to have admitting privileges at a local hospital was unconstitutional. It's a medically unnecessary regulation, but it's really burdensome and hard for providers to meet. And the Supreme Court said exactly that actually 4 years ago in a Texas case. So what the Supreme Court was doing here was basically deciding the same thing it had decided 4 years before and saying that this law is in fact unconstitutional. And then the other thing that the Supreme Court decided was that it is okay, as it has been again for decades, it's okay for doctors and clinics to bring these lawsuits challenging abortion restrictions on behalf of their patients. You don't have to have an individual patient in the lawsuit. It can be brought by the clinic or by the doctor. And again, that has been the rule for a really long time, and the Supreme Court just reaffirmed that. So even though it kind of sounds like it should have been a really straightforward case, I have to say, yes, I was a little bit surprised. We have a majority of justices, 5 of the 9 on the US Supreme Court, are opposed to abortion rights, are opposed to Roe v. Wade. And the one thing that made the difference was Chief Justice Roberts, who is opposed to Roe v. Wade and opposed to abortion rights, actually sided with the liberal wing of the court because he said, we already decided this issue in 2016, and precedent matters, the rule of law matters, and therefore I'm gonna join the court in striking down this law.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the admitting privileges and why it is important that they said that that's unnecessary?
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of people know much about admitting privileges or what it means. I mean, it sounds like saying, well, doctors have to have admitting privileges at a hospital. What could possibly be wrong with that? But the reality is that this is something they don't need, because what admitting privileges are is it means that you are on staff at a hospital and you can admit patients to stay overnight at that hospital. And abortion is such a safe procedure, and it's usually provided in these outpatient clinics. And so you really don't need admitting privileges to be able to perform abortions. And in fact, it can be really hard for doctors who do abortions at clinics to even get them, because they don't, a lot of hospitals, when they are like deciding who to give privileges to, they want you to admit a certain number of patients per year, for example. Well, again, abortion is so safe that the doctors don't admit patients, so they can't get them. And then the other thing is, of course, that we know that in a lot of parts of this country, including, for example, Louisiana, hospitals are really hostile to abortion, or a lot of people are hostile to abortion. And even for that reason alone, they sometimes just deny admitting privileges to doctors because they don't want to mess with it, or because they don't like that the doctor is using them for this reason. So it really gives no benefit to the patient at all that her doctor does or doesn't have admitting privileges. If the patient has a complication, she can still go to the hospital. The hospital's still going to see her. They're still going to take her. If she needs to be admitted, she will be admitted. So it doesn't really matter whether her provider has that. But then it's a really burdensome thing to try to get for a lot of abortion providers.
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation. I think a lot of people can think that when they hear admitting privileges, it's like, oh, the law is just to try to protect the patient, but really it's just to limit access to abortion, and they've already ruled on that for one. But do you see any downsides to the ruling? I know it just came out today, but do you see any downsides that could possibly come up?
Well, I mean, one thing that's interesting about it, and you're right, it just came down today, the whole decision, if you look at the whole thing. It's 138 pages. So there's a lot of stuff to analyze in there. But one issue is that Chief Justice Roberts, although he joined the 4 liberal justices in striking down the law, he didn't join their opinion. And so there's no like majority opinion in the case. There's no opinion that has 5 justices signed on to it. And Justice Roberts' opinion was a little bit narrower than the main opinion in the case. And so, in some ways anyway, and so, you know, it sort of leaves some questions unanswered. There's less guidance coming from this case than there would have been if he had just joined the majority opinion. And it kind of will let states keep passing laws that are unconstitutional, that restrict abortion, and kind of keep the fight going in a lot of ways, because it just it mostly returns us to the status quo, but it leaves questions open about what courts should be doing in the future.
Yeah, so kind of along those lines, so Ohio has 4 really important cases that are pending in federal court. So how do you think this ruling will impact that, besides what you just mentioned a little bit?
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, I think it's mostly gonna just kind of keep the status quo in terms of like, you know, we're gonna have to keep fighting. We don't like win more easily now. It's gonna be kind of all the same stuff. The one thing that does help is that the Supreme Court, you know, made it very clear, and actually Justice Roberts agreed with this, that that clinics and physicians can bring these cases on behalf of their patients. So we were all really worried that if the case went the other way, in all of our cases, the state would start arguing that, you know, clinics couldn't bring these cases, they had to be dismissed, you had to find somebody different, you had to find a patient. That argument's probably mostly gone. So that helps in all of the cases we have right now. But, you know, in terms of sort of winning and showing they're unconstitutional, it's pretty much the same fight that we're going to keep fighting.
Yeah, I had heard a little bit about the clinics being able to represent the patients and like how important that is, and I think definitely that's like a big win, not having to get people to relive their traumas over court. So exactly. When do you think we'll start to see some of these outcomes that we talked about, like the the outcomes from this decision?
So yeah, we have some cases, like right now, there's a case that's pending in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's a challenge to Ohio's law that bans abortion if the part of the reason for the abortion is a diagnosis of fetal Down syndrome, for example. Yeah. That case, you know, we expect to see a decision coming down now in the next, it's really hard to know because litigation doesn't have a very predictable timeline, but in the next few weeks to few months, I guess I would say. So maybe later this year, 2020. A lot of other cases are still at the sort of trial court level and working their way up. So, you know, those again, it could actually be a year or more before we see any decisions. And so we don't expect any really radical changes coming out of those cases anytime soon.
So like this impact will be continuing on for a while now.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, I guess mostly the Supreme Court just reaffirmed the status quo, but like the status quo was not that great to begin with. So it still means, you know, we just have to keep fighting tooth and nail against these unconstitutional restrictions. Yeah.
Kind of going off of that, so Ohio has multiple other abortion restrictions. I mean, you talked about the one, but there are a lot going through the legislature. What do you think the Ohio legislature should take from today's ruling as they consider all these other bills as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, I hope that at least they get the message that like the law matters, the Constitution matters, you know, precedent matters. So maybe they could dial back a little bit on the unconstitutional measures they can't seem to pass fast enough, right? Like, and you know, I think that they maybe should hesitate a little bit before thinking that the Supreme Court's just going to overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, I can't say, you know, this case was not about that, and I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say for sure what's going to happen in the next few years, but, you know, I would take it as a signal that this is maybe not as good a time to be pushing for that as they thought it was.
Yeah, not as easy of a fight as they might have thought it is now that there's the different sides of the court. You know, it's not just because it's maybe in your favor in that way doesn't mean that you're going to easily win the cases.
Exactly. I mean, I think they thought like, you know, they owned the Supreme Court now, right? They had the votes. They were going to tell them what's up. They were going to, you know, pass laws that were directly in contradiction to Supreme Court precedents and all of that. And yeah, and at least the Supreme Court here stepped in and said, nope, not today. So we'll see what the future brings. But that's right. It wasn't as simple as they thought it was.
More of a fighting chance on the side of a abortion access for people in the United States.
Yes.
So is there anything else that you wanted to say about the case that you haven't mentioned so far?
I mean, I think that, you know, I think it's a great victory. It's a great day. I had, you know, been like holding my breath like many of us just to see what the Supreme Court was going to do. And it was a huge relief. You know, I guess the only thing is there's a little, I wish it had been a bigger victory. You know, I wish Chief Justice Roberts had joined the main opinion. You know, I wish he'd been a little bit more clear about like not overturning Whole Woman's Health or Roe v. Wade, you know, in the future and all of that. But I think that, you know, we should really take this victory to heart and celebrate it and be glad that we live to fight another day.
Yeah. I only hope that we'll start being able to have victories that we celebrate because we've won something that we want, rather than not having another bad thing happen. That's
yes.
Like the hope for the future, is that we can start celebrating the good things, but at least another bad thing didn't happen.
That is, yeah, exactly. I guess that's what I was trying to get at too. That's exactly right. Like, yeah, it would be nice to have a victory that feels like more than just holding off the badness.
Yeah. Well, if you don't have anything else that you'd like to say, it was really great talking to you, and I feel like I've learned a little bit more about this case. And
great.
Yeah, so we'll get to celebrate today, and hopefully we'll get to celebrate better things in the future.
Yes, yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, so nice talking with you too.
Awesome.